Welcome to Truth Be Told, where we believe and experience becomes truth. Today we're exploring the mysteries on our planet and beyond.
We invite you to join us with an open mind and a desire for continued knowledge from some of the leading experts, researchers, and some of the best-selling authors from around the world. We also want to remind you that Conscious Life Expo proudly sponsors Truth Be Told. To get your tickets to their February Expo, go to consciouslifeexpo.com and be sure to pick up books and other products from our guest at www.adventuresunlimitedpress.com, where books can bring answers and a new passion for knowledge.
Today we go back to the beginning of mankind, searching for answers to questions that humans have been asking since Adam and Eve.
The Anunnaki. Who were they, and where did they come from? Did they influence early man in a good way, or were they simply using humans as slaves in order to mine Earth's precious minerals for themselves?
And finally, we're getting the answers to these questions and more with our next guest.
Marshall Klarfeld is a Caltech graduate engineer who benefited greatly from his 50-year career in business and politics. His current pursuit of the history of the Anunnaki has propelled him into the field of ancient history, and his research has uncovered what may be a defining moment in archaeology. He believes the information in his book, The Anunnaki Were Here, may rank among the 10 most important archaeological finds of the 21st century. Marshall is the author of several books, including his latest, Mysteries of Alien Technologies. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome the expert that's here to answer the mystery behind the Anunnaki history, Marshall Klarfeld.
Yay! We're here with Marshall Klarfeld. How you doing?
Thank you. Great. That was a wonderful introduction. You covered a lot of ground there.
Well, we're glad that you have that experience that we can cover. That's
true,
right? All right, everybody that is tuned in with us today, we're so excited to have our guest. I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Walt Lusk.
And we're going to dive right into it because Marshall, we got
a lot of ground,
a lot of ground, and even though it's about 50 minutes, that goes really fast. We want to go ahead and start with a few questions because a lot of our audience they don't know who they are or why we're here. But the biggest question is, who is Marshall? Who is Marshall, and how did you get started in this quest to discover?
That's a good question, Tony. I guess it all started back in 1947 when I entered Caltech as a freshman. That summer, the Roswell incident occurred, and of course, in the bull sessions around the house where I was a freshman, all we talked about was UFOs. I mean, that was the exciting news of the day. And here I was in this scientific institution with a bunch of smart people, and I wanted to know, where did the UFOs come from and who was behind them and all those kind of questions. Now, prior to entering Caltech, I'd been doing a lot of reading in the Bible, and frankly, Tony, I found some mysteries in the Bible that I couldn't find answers for, so it kind of came together in 1947, and I had the wonderful experience of having some great teachers and getting into some great answers to questions. For instance, I had for physics a guy named Richard Feynman. Feynman was the Einstein of my generation. He's probably the smartest guy that ever I talked to. And one day in a brazen interview, one-on-one with him, I asked him, I said, Dr. Feynman, do you believe in UFOs? He said, Klarfeld, I believe in the law of probability. Of the billions of stars in the Milky Way galaxy and of the hundreds of billions of galaxies in the universe, the law of probability tells me there are 10,000 solar systems exactly like ours. Ours is the youngest, as you know, and if any of those other civilizations survived their space age, they could have visited us. And I said to myself, wow, that answer is beautiful. And it took me 60 years, Tony, to figure out what the phrase was, if they survived their space age. We're at that point right now. Mm-hmm. Our civilization is just creeping into our space age, and we're equipped with missiles and atomic weapons, and we're on the verge of being able to destroy ourselves and not continue the experiment. So I did some reading as the years passed, asking the questions to myself, where did we come from, and what's the universe all about? And I discovered a guy named Zachariah Sitchin. That was kind of like in we'll fast forward to 1999.
Last century.
And Zachariah proposed certain theories in his first book called The 12th Planet. And once I discovered that, I formed a friendship relationship, long-distance telephone, then in person-to-person, for over a 10-year period. And during that period of time, we discussed, as he had pronounced in his books, this space-age civilization called the Anunnaki, which apparently colonized planet Earth over 400,000 years ago, and left some remarkable signatures here on our planet, and did some wonderful creations, and perhaps the greatest creation was you and me, Tony.
And
so that's how I got into the history of the Anunnaki.
And it's very fascinating. I mean, so fascinating because, many people, have opportunities to get intrigued by something, and then they may dwell in it or dive into it just a little bit. But you went like head first. And what was that first adventure that you can tell us that you went on when it was dealing with the Anunnaki?
Well, the first time, you see, I was curious about where we came from. That's the main question. I think that the first question is where we humans came from. The second question is where the universe come from. And those are pretty difficult questions to answer. The second one, where the universe came from, I think is still in doubt. Nobody really can answer that question. But whereas we are the dominant species on this planet, and we shouldn't be here. You and I, it should not exist, Tony, because evolution is a theory that works, but the other animals aren't creating buildings and rocket ships and all the things that you and I are associated with. Humans are a species that is just not supposed to be here. In fact, the species before us was called Homo erectus, and they were a species that evolved, according to Darwin, over 1,800,000 years, and they populated all the parts, the land surfaces of the Earth, came out of Africa, and over 1,800,000 years they evolved. But the most advanced they got, Tony, was stones and spears. Their technology was primitive, and there was no reason for them to become civilized because they didn't need to. They just survived the way they did. And then all of a sudden, 200,000 years ago, the species Homo sapien appears in Southeast Africa, and it's much more advanced than this Homo erectus species. It starts with a civilization that eventually appears in the Sumerian culture, and the Sumerians appear about 9,000 years ago, and they have all the firsts. They have literature, they have writing, they have music, philosophy, etc. And the question that the anthropologists ask, how could a civilization of only 9,000 years ago appear with all of the fundamental requirements for a civilization? And that's how I got into this, answer that Zachariah brought to us, which was that we are a civilization that is remarkable and hard to explain.
And I know Zachariah also, is he the one that first deciphered the tablets from, is it Nineveh?
Nineveh?
Nineveh,
yeah, Nineveh, right.
Was he the first one to decipher these tablets?
No. Actually, these tablets, the cuneiform tablets, where all this information comes from, your audience should understand that there's a large database of information from which all the stories about the Anunnaki emanate. It's called the cuneiform tablets, the Sumerian cuneiform tablets. They discovered over 300,000 of them around early 1800s. And there were other people who started translating them. Zechariah was just one of many translators, but he was able to, because of his background in history and languages, put together a cosmology of what they were saying and make some sense out of it. The other people who had made translations of these cuneiform tablets came up with a lot of different understandings. He put it together, and as far as I'm concerned, I think his his translations are the ones that make the most sense because he was able to tie it into the Bible. He was a biblical scholar, and he grew up studying Hebrew. He could read 5 or 6 different languages in the original form, and he taught himself how to translate cuneiform and understand what the Sumerians were saying about this flesh and blood beings that lived with them, who they called the Anunnaki. You see, the first time we hear about the Anunnaki is from the Sumerians. The Sumerians claim that they lived side by side with this space-age civilization, and most of our information comes from that database.
So, and Marshall, I come from a metaphysical background, and I'm very fascinated with the paranormal. I don't think of this as paranormal. I think of this as an actual reality, if that makes sense. And I'm curious. I have 2 questions. The first one is, when you share this with certain people that are, let's say, religious scholars and that sort of thing, what are you normally met with whenever they hear this information for the first time?
Well, there are faith-based people, which are the ones that you're referring to, and I encounter them continually through my lecturing and conferences and so forth. And I tell them, I said, you should believe in your faith, trust what you've learned, but keep an open mind.
Well stated.
And the information that I'm revealing to you is coming from some hard data, data that is hard to
ignore.
Dispel. It's written, and the interpretation of it has to be something that you want to deal with as far as your faith base goes. And I tell them that the most interesting thing about the Anunnaki was that they had a deity. They had a deity, and they called their deity the creator of all.
Wow.
And believe it or not, they didn't have the answers to everything either. They didn't know where the universe came from. In fact, frankly, I've asked myself many times, Tony, where did the Anunnaki come from?
Mm-hmm.
Who created them? And, their civilization maybe was 1 million years more advanced than us. Obviously, to have come to the planet Earth from their planet and travel through the distances and the rigors of space travel, land here, colonize this planet 400,000 years ago, and create many of the magnificent structures that we look at today and give credit to other people. That's what's fascinating.
Wow. And go ahead. No, go ahead. I was sorry. I didn't know you were. I didn't know you had another thing you were going to say. What were you going to say, Marshall?
No, just that the fact that my research has led me, Tony, into areas today of things that our historical books tell us were built by the Romans, the Greeks, the Egyptians, and the Sumerians. And I'm starting to question whether they really were the architects of those structures because I'm reverse engineering them. Fortunately, I have a mechanical engineering degree from Caltech, and I'm able to do that in my mind, and I say, no way, were they general contractors.
So pretty much that's your personal as well as your professional opinion.
Yeah.
Say again?
That's your personal as well as your professional opinion.
Yes, it's my personal and professional.
Yes.
And I what I do in my books, guys, is I put a lot of color pictures. I don't know if you've ever seen any of my books, but they're 8.5 by 11. They're kind of like a Life magazine, and they're filled with colored pictures. And I tell a story, and I say, these are the facts that I'm reporting to you. I'm a reporter, a researcher, and you make up your own mind. I'm just telling you that this is what I see, and this is what I know from my professional opinion would be required to do this structure, to put this thing together. And I just don't think the local folks had that technology or the equipment to do it.
Exactly.
Wow, God, I love
Make up your own mind. I don't tell people to believe what I say. I say just open your mind and try to figure it out for yourself.
Well, I mean, the mind is like a parachute. If it's not open, it's not any good.
Yeah, you're going to be stuck in that habitual cycle where you don't want to be, but constantly bitching about where you do want to be. And Marshall, I'm very interested about something I've heard through my studies for many, many years about Atlantis and other civilizations as well. And I have heard numerous times about there being intergalactic kind of exchange programs, for lack of a better way to say it, in Atlantis and the Mayan and the Lemuria, et cetera, et cetera. What's your spin on that with what you know and with the Anunnaki?
Okay. It's a very good question. In fact, Atlantis is one of the most interesting puzzles that most of us try to figure out. I've done some research myself on it, but I know that if there was a civilization, like say, project us a million years from now, or say 10,000 years from now, we are space age travelers. We go to another planet, and we find a kind of a primitive aboriginal species there, and we, give them 10 rules to live by and show them what the history of their civilization might have been. It's kind of a look back at what we are and how we got to where we are. You have to kind of expand your mind to believe that if what is said in the cuneiform tablets, the fact that they came here, that the space age civilization called the Anunnaki came here, and that what they did is they built cities for themselves before there were people. In other words, if they got here 400,000 years ago, where there were no Homo sapiens.
Yeah, I was going to say, if the Sumerians are 9,000 years ago and they've been here for 400,000 years, I mean, that's a pretty big gap.
Yeah, and we know that the first skeletal remains, guys, of Homo sapiens is about 200,000 years old in Southeast Africa.
Okay.
So if you start there,
right,
and if you look in the short time of 200,000 years, we're walking on the moon in 1969. We've advanced our tool making way beyond Homo erectus. I mean, come on, give me a break. How would that happen?
Well, the pyramids are supposedly 10,000 years old.
The pyramids?
Mm-hmm. That's a rumor.
You see, if the pyramids, say, were 10,000 years old, there were no Egyptians 10,000 years ago.
Wow, that's just so. That's one of
why
those.
Why are we crediting them?
I know.
That's one of those wonderful common sense, between the eyes, bullseye, slap you down and make you go, "Oh my God!"
Do the math.
Yeah, that's perfect. Thank you, Marshall. So,
well, these are the things that pop up as you
do the
this
math.
research, and you avail yourself of the information, and you look at the timelines. You say, "Well, my God, we weren't advanced enough. We didn't have the tools." I mean, if
Absolutely,
you look
absolutely
at the Egyptians about 5,000 years ago had copper tools. Copper and bronze were their tools. And the stuff that is built and credited to them is all made out of polished granite. You can't cut granite with copper and bronze
And
tools.
a few of the boulders that it was built were
you can't
good
fit
size.
it together. You can't move 10-ton or 100-ton blocks of granite out of the quarries and down the river and into the various places they said they did this. So I'm finding all these fascinating stories that are kind of folklore.
Yes.
Right.
And people, it's interesting, the archaeologists tend to repeat each other. They say, well, this guy said that, so I say that, and that must be what it is. But it isn't.
Well, if enough say it, it must be true.
Mysteries of Alien Technology, I go into such structures as the Parthenon in Greece and the Pantheon in Rome and the Colosseum in Rome.
Right.
And Machu Picchu.
Et cetera, and all the obelisks in Egypt. And I say to myself, these things are remarkable in their ability to have been carved out of solid rock, granite, and then moved a great distance and then put in place.
So
it takes a lot of technology to do that.
So you're implying they're hiding in plain sight.
That's right. That's right.
Well, and also, if you're just tuning in, you're listening to On Air with Tony Sweet at ubnradio.com.
And I'm Tony Sweet.
I'm Eddie Connor.
I'm Walt Lusk.
And we're having a wonderful interview about the Anunnaki with Marshall Klarfeld. And I've been to Peru, more specifically to Machu Picchu, Huayna Picchu, and that sort of thing, Marshall, 3 times now. Each time that I have been there, as an intuitive, as a sensitive, I've been able to just randomly, not deliberately, just have these spontaneous psychic visions of some of those gigantic boulders, like what you see at Sexy Woman and Machu, literally being elevated up by some force. It wasn't humans, in my personal opinion, and locked in some kind of like ridiculous labyrinth of stones interlocking each other that are gigantic, tons and tons worth of weight. And then I saw on your website and some of the things that you've done on YouTube about Machu Picchu. Give us just a couple of sentences or your perspective about the Anunnaki in and at Machu Picchu, if you don't mind.
Okay, fine. That's an excellent question. In fact, I feature Machu Picchu in both my recent books, the Anunnaki Were Here and the Mysteries of Alien Technology, because it's a structure that, you know, lots of people climb up there and wonder about it and look at it. And I looked at it from a distance, and it looked to me like a gigantic set of washboard, all those terraces that come down the mountainside at all different angles. In fact, I feature a picture of it in one of my books from the air, and it just looks like a gigantic washboard. And one day it dawned on me that the purpose of the Anunnaki, the reason they came to our planet 400,000 years ago, was in search of gold. They needed gold to solve a problem that they had back home on their home planet. They'd kind of burned a hole in their in their atmosphere. And like a spaceship, if you punch a hole in a spaceship, you're in trouble.
Right.
So they were in trouble on their planet. And, you know, one of the solutions, the only solution that they found would work, was powder gold and blow it up into the ozone hole, and it would help it seal itself, because gold reflects the sun, and somehow that's a healing process for ozone leaks. But they didn't have any gold on their planet, so they came to Earth and they mined our gold. Now, they were doing it before there were humans. For 200,000 years, they were mining gold in the way that we do it today, is to dig down under the earth, find a vein, and then go through all the process of banging the rocks and smelting them and refining it and getting the gold. But 11,000 years ago, everybody kind of agrees there was this great flood. And the great flood covered the earth with miles and miles of mud, thick mud, which buried all of their mines and kind of cut off that type of supply. And it dawned on me that there was an easier way to get gold, which was to take the nature's force, which is nature in the spring runoff and the snow peaks of the Peruvian Alps, strips gold out of the veins and takes it into the rivers and brings it downstream. And if you could separate that gold out of the water, it would be a lot easier than digging for it. So in order to do that, today we've, in 1849, in California, they had what's called a sluice box. And the sluice box had in it kind of a washboard surface, and gold being 19 times heavier than water, if it bangs into something, it'll drop and drops into the slot. So if you ran the sluice, river mud from the placid rivers, through these sluice boxes, you could separate the gold out. Well, here's what came to me like a light bulb went off. If you could just take the placer water and drip it over a terrace surface, you could precipitate out the gold onto a structure like Machu Picchu. Now, as you climbed up to Machu Picchu, you encountered several other structures that are never talked about, but they're all terrace structures, right?
Yep, That's right.
Every one of them is a terrace structure. And you look at the step pyramids throughout Central and South America, they're step pyramids, right?
They are. That's right. Absolutely.
Okay, so it dawned on me that this was a system that could work if you knew how to collect the gold. It was in my third book, The Anunnaki Were Here. I pronounced this theory, which I called the Washboard gold mining theory, but I never explained how they picked up the gold after it got on the terraces.
Mm-hmm.
In my fourth book, I bring the solution full circle, which I think reinforces my theory of how that worked. And it was another light bulb that went off, and we can get into that if you want to. But
of course,
I believe that these structures up at Sassy Woman and the zigzag walls, if you look at the zigzag walls from the air, it's a step pyramid on its edge. So the stream would come down through those two channels. You know, there's three sets of walls there.
Yep.
You could have actually three channels of water coming from the Peruvian Alps filled with placer gold, and it would bang into these corners as it came down that hillside, running against the wall. The reason that the cornerstones are so humongous is that there's a tremendous amount of force from water banging into it. So it had to be rock solid to resist that. A 450-degree diameter circular structure, but a bunch of terraces. And the key to that was that there were stairways in between the terraces, which were 12 inches high. And if you've ever been to, say, Chichen Itza, which is a step pyramid, climb the stairway and try to come down, you find out you're totally disoriented because 12-inch steps are not built for humans.
Yeah.
They're built for much taller species, and you have to kind of sit down on your rump and bump your way down. So I figure that these guys, the Anunnaki, were reported to be about 9 feet tall, and 12-inch steps would fit them perfectly. And if the Greek architect who built the amphitheater in Sicily wanted humans to climb up and down, he would have provided 7-inch steps, not the 12-inch steps. In fact, the Greeks covered them over with wooden stairways, 7-inch wooden stairways, so that they could get people up and down into the amphitheater. So, in fact, they inherited this structure and converted it to their use. But it was not originally built by them. And just as Machu Picchu was not originally built by the Incas, I think archaeologists are just following each other when they claim that that was Inca construction. It wasn't. There are 12-inch steps in Machu Picchu, also built and carved out of the stone. And you ask yourself, this is a granite mountaintop that's been leveled. Part of the main area where the meadow is a plateau that's been leveled out of granite. Now, we know that the Incas didn't have any tools strong enough to put a dent in granite. So how the hell could they have done it?
Exactly.
Is there? I want to ask a question in Machu Picchu. When you were saying the water, how did they pump the water
from the Urubamba River? How did they pump the gold from the river?
Okay, good question. Okay,
great question.
I have two theories that I can't prove them yet. I intend to go down there and try to prove it. But pumping water is no big task. For if you have a space age civilization that got themselves to our planet from another planet, pumping water.
This is true.
Let's not put that as a problem. But the easy way to do it is that the eastern side, where the river comes on the eastern side of that peak. If you look down at Machu Picchu, it's kind of a really sharp curve where the river comes and goes around the peak and goes down the other side, and the elevation is dropping, so that it's at least a couple of hundred feet higher on the front side of the mountain as it is on the south side, on the west side of the mountain, the east and west, let's say. So you could siphon it. It's easy to siphon water if it's higher and lower. Or you could use, whatever pumping system they had. But the secret of it was that you couldn't run the water over the terraces at full speed. You had to have a controlled pump so that the water would go down in a controlled manner so that the gold could precipitate out. If you flushed it down fast, it probably would just not collect a lot of it. To collect the maximum amount of gold, the water had to be controlled. And I'm sure if you look at pyramids like Chichen Itza, the pump house was at the top, and the water supply was in the cenote, which is right next to it. And I've produced a picture in my book showing that when the water level, I was there in the year 2000, I think.
I saw that video. Yeah, it was great.
The water level was up to the top, but now it's gone way down, and there's a huge kind of a concrete wall with a hole in it, which I think was the entrance for the pumping of that water, because it's an underground river, feeds that cenote, and it's filled with placer gold, and they just pumped it to the house on the top of the Chichen Itza, El Castillo, I think is what they call that number, and then just poured it over the edges. Now, an interesting thing about that structure is that the stairways, there's 4 stairways on the 4 sides of the pyramid, right? Mm-hmm. And those steps are 12-inch steps, but they don't give you access to the terraces. Now, I produced the picture in my new book, which shows there's, on the side of that stairway, there are climbing stones that protrude from the side of the stairway, and it gives you access to the terraces. And why would you put protruding stones all the way up the side of the stairway for looks? It's not as pretty as a smooth surface, but it certainly were climbing stones that gave them access to the terraces so they could collect the gold.
That is so fascinating. Because, like I said, I was watching your video on YouTube about the pyramid and the pump that you.
Oh, the Great Pyramid.
Yeah, I'm gonna go. Let's go. Let's fly from where we're at
Machu Picchu to the Great Pyramid.
Because
okay,
that was fascinating. I mean, you can tell you're a brilliant man, because this ADD person could not even come close to that. But it's so believable.
Tony,
it's so believable.
Had theories of what went on inside. That was the most complex interior of any pyramid ever built. And let's say it was built 10,000 years ago. It had to have a function and a purpose.
Right.
It wouldn't have gone to the trouble of building all those chambers and all those passageways. And as I explained in my book, everything inside there is watertight.
Right.
In order to build watertight with stone, that takes some pretty clever work.
And people believe that the Nile River was...
If it was watertight, they had to put water in it. And then there was a guy who, wasn't me, but a guy named John Cadman, figured out what the hydraulic pulse pump was. It's called the Pharaoh's pump. And I show that if you built and there was a moat around the base of the Great Pyramid so that you could fill it with water and raise the water level up to the entrance, which is about 36 feet above the ground. And then you had this descending passageway, which was a perfect chute to make a hydraulic pulse pump work. And I have in my lectures shown how that worked. And the main feature of all the stuff inside the Great Pyramid is the Grand Gallery. And the Grand Gallery is a beautifully structured cobalt ceiling. In other words, when you had these huge pieces of granite stone connected together and you built a vaulted ceiling, like it's an upside-down pyramid. If you look at it from that angle, the water surged in and out, up and down the Grand Gallery, bumping against these cobalt ledges as it went up, and it knocked the gold down into these 27 slots, which were built on either side of the stairway up the Grand Gallery, and that's where they collected the gold. And the most interesting thing to me was that there's a sarcophagus in what they call the King's Chamber, the top chamber of the system. And it's all damaged. All the outside edges are damaged, and nobody's ever explained why that thing's sitting inside the King's Chamber with its... All the exterior edges are terribly beaten up. And my theory is that thing floated. When the water got up to the King's Chamber, it floated the box. Archimedes tells us anything with a hole in it will float. Here's this 10-ton stone sarcophagus floating around inside the King's Chamber, banging on the edges and causing all the damage that we see. And in one corner, they finally damaged enough down to the part where the water went into it and it sunk. And I think that was the end of that usage. One of the marvelous things, guys, about the Anunnaki is that they had multiple uses for everything that they did. All their edifices could be used in many, many ways, and they were very clever. And I think later on, the interior and the design was used for other things, and people have expounded on that. Chris Dunn has done a wonderful job calling it a power plant. And I don't know if you've read that or not, but that's very possible later on. But what I'm saying is originally, its original design and use was a washboard interior gold mining operation, and they took the Nile River, which was filled with placer gold coming down from the Nubian gold fields, every spring runoff, and put it in there and produced gold. Well, that's my theory. Now, I want people to challenge that. I want people to come and attack me on that because I think it's something new that's been never thought of before, and I'm pretty proud of having figured it out, but I'd like other people to attack me on it.
And for those of you who don't know, thousands of years ago, the Nile is actually right next to the Great Pyramids. It's obviously moved due to time. So, I mean, that alone from a water source is, straightforward in that regard.
Well, they moved water around very easily. They were marvelous hydraulic engineers. If you look at the aqueduct, the Roman aqueduct system.
That was amazing.
Incredible.
Yeah.
Yes.
There's a bridge in France, southern France, called the Pont de Garde. I feature that in my new book. And it's a bridge put together entirely with precision-cut stones and no mortar. All the arches, everything in there, and there's metal clamps inside of it that hold the stone together. The stones are not held with masonry. They're held by gravity, friction, and metal clamps. And it's stood there for 2,000 years across that river. Every other bridge that's been built across that river has been wiped out. So you got to ask yourself, how the hell could a bridge supposedly built by the Romans lasted 2,000 years and also acted as an aqueduct? Not only was it a bridge across the river, but it was an aqueduct, brought water to a community called Nimes in southwestern France. And I feature that in my new book. By the way, if your audience is interested in seeing any of my books, they can go to my website, Tony, and that's www.adamthemissinglink.com.
That's what, yeah.
Yeah, we have that up on the screen right now, so people out there,
great.
make sure you guys
There,
check it out.
The first page will tell you the story with a little video I posted on the first page. But you go to the second page, and there's a selection of books there that are available as ebooks, available as hard copies, and also available as Kindle books.
And for
multiple choice.
And for the audience, it's Adam, the Missing Link. It's one of the books, Mysteries of Alien Technologies. And, of course, the Anunnaki were here, and that's all at adamthemissinglink.com.
Yeah, and there's another book there called Gilgamesh 10.
Oh, I love this.
That's one of the most interesting. It's the first story ever written on the planet, and we wrote it as a screenplay.
Oh,
really?
In a screenplay format, and we're hoping one day to make a movie.
Yeah,
out of it.
That would be
anybody
great.
picked it up yet?
Right. Well, they just did Stranger at the Pentagon.
Yes.
Craig Capobasso did that, and it has started already to win a bunch of things at the independent film festivals and breaking records across the board. So we're moving, the consciousness, at least some of it, is moving in the right direction to wake people up, if you will. And so, Marshall, when the Anunnaki came to the Earth plane originally, did they just sort of inhabit the entire thing before us humans came on board, or just certain power places?
Yeah, okay. The story from the cuneiform database is that they splashed down in the Persian Gulf, and they tried to mine the gold out of the bottom of the Persian Gulf, and they got some gold, but mostly they got a bunch of other stuff, so they figured that wasn't very productive. So they moved inland at the mouth of the Tigris-Euphrates River, which is the beginning of the Mesopotamian civilization, and that's where the Sumerians came from. But before there were the Sumerians, for 200,000 years, they had a city complex. Sitchin describes it very vividly in his book, The 12th Planet. And there were 10 or 12 cities, which he calls the olden time. They were just Anunnaki cities, and the Sumerians produced an interesting document called the Sumerians' Kings List. And in the Kings List, they named the kings and the length of time that they were in their kingship in this city complex, which was in the Tigris-Euphrates complex. And it wasn't until after the Great Flood, of course, that was all wiped out in the Great Flood, that that was 11,000 years ago. About 9,000 years ago, we 9 to 6,000 years ago, you get the Sumerian civilization in that same area. And these are human civilizations, but they're cohabitating with the Anunnaki. And this is what's fascinating about the book Gilgamesh 10. We wrote a story where we project you backwards 4,600 years into the city of Uruk, where this king, who, by the way, is 2/3 Anunnaki and 1/3 human, he's a hybrid.
Oh.
And he's rattling around with the Anunnaki and humans. It's a fascinating look into what the history would have been like at that time, and we are very proud of that book. My wife did all the dialogue. It's a fun book. It's a fun book.
Yeah,
anyway,
no,
what we've done is we've produced these 4 books, which are, as I say, Life magazine format, 8.5 by 11, filled with lots of colored pictures. Makes it easy to understand Sitchin's theories. Sitchin was a brilliant scholar. He wrote 15 to 20 books, I think, but they're hard to read, frankly. Right. And I told him that. I said, Zachariah, I had this 10-year relationship with him. I said, do you mind if I produce a book that explains your stuff, but it's in kind of a picture format, like Life magazine? He says, Marshall, that sounds like a good idea, but I want you to be sure to, when you use any of my stuff, you say, by permission from Zachariah Sitchin. I said, of course. So wherever I use his stuff, it's a little note there says, with permission from Zachariah Sitchin. But he was delighted that I thought enough of his work and his theories and agreed with him on everything except a couple of things. We had some disagreements, but they weren't disagreements. They were my thinking outside the box guys. And I said to myself, you're giving us the translation of what the Anunnaki said and what they did and da-da-da-da-da, and the reason they did this and the reason they did that. I said, did you ever think that they were spinning us? He said, Marshall, what do you mean spinning? I said, well, the story of the mutiny in the gold mines. I said, maybe they just wanted to create a slave species and they had an excuse.
Which is what I was going to ask next. Were they here cohabitating in a friendly way, or were they manipulating the human race, or was it a combination of all of the above?
We obviously were primitive workers. We took the place of all the menial level work that they've been doing themselves, the gold mining and the servant job, what normally a subservient class would do for an advanced class. That's happened all throughout history.
Sure
Nothing
has.
new about that. But their intents and purposes towards us, that's a good question. A lot of people ask me that, and I said, well, there were two leaderships in the Anunnaki. There was the Enlilites and the Enkiites. And Enki was the one that, if you read the story of the Great Flood, which, by the way, appears in the 11th tablet of the Epic of Gilgamesh. That's what's fascinating about that story. They tell you what really happened during the Great Flood, and before and after and during. And it's not the same story in the Bible. No, it's the story that appears in the Bible of Noah and the Ark. You've got to ask yourself your question, how could any human being build a ship large enough to contain...
Right. And it was very more general in the Bible, too. It was just kind of like basic, the cliff notes.
Well, that answer, by the way, is explained in the book.
Yeah.
Wow.
When I retell the story of the Great Flood in Gilgamesh 10, you'll get the real facts about what all happened. And, of course, the people who wrote the Bible, the stories there, came from the cuneiform database. But they didn't have the technology in their minds or the advancement to understand certain things. So they used and presented it in what they understood.
Oh.
And that's how we got those stories in the Bible, because they weren't advanced enough to translate what technically was really going on.
So whenever they're talking about starships and spaceships, it's something they had never known at that point, so they described them as suns and stars moving across the sky.
Exactly, or as chariots.
Wow.
Von Daniken contributed the first book in 1964 called The Chariots of the Gods.
Mm-hmm.
And there were celestial vehicles, and some descriptions of them came into the Bible. And by the way, guys, if you go to chapter in Genesis, go to Genesis 6:4, and you'll see that the Nephilim, the word Nephilim, were upon the earth in those days. They were the sons of gods, and they coveted the daughters of man and had intercourse with them and created the giants of old, the men of renown. And, you got to ask yourself, who the hell were the Nephilim?
This is fascinating.
Those are the stories that we get from the cuneiform database. It tells about the intermarriage. I mean, Gilgamesh himself, his mother was a Anunnaki queen, and his father was human, so he was 2/3 Anunnaki. And we have guys like Atlas and Hercules and all these giant humans that were so strong. They were hybrids.
And we only have like 5 or 6 minutes left, Marshall, but I have this really interesting question for you. When do you think we will continue to find proof? I know we found proof of some skeletons and some ruins and different things like that, but when do you think it will be more available so that the human race will stop and go, okay, I get it now. We have proof. Let's expand our consciousness in our lifetime.
That's a great question, and I'll tell you, that's why I write my books. It's in my books. In other words, what I've done with my books in a subconscious way is given the evidence, the factual, physical evidence here on planet Earth that could not have been done by humans alone.
Wow, we love
too much advanced technology. So if you put it all together and connect the dots, you've got to come away with the answer that you're asking me is, who did it? It wasn't us.
And
it
obviously,
was an advanced civilization that did it, and what it reinforces and proves, I think, the stories in the cuneiform tablets that they were here. The Sumerians called them flesh and blood beings, and they described them, and they wrote about them, and they said everything we have was given to us by the Anunnaki, which means all their technology that appears miraculously out of nowhere. People come out of the caves; they don't have philosophy and music and literature and all that stuff, astronomy, astrology, like the Sumerians did. So you got to ask yourself, well, where the heck did they get it? Well, they tell us. They got it from the Anunnaki. It was technology transfer. And then when you take my books, all my books, and you look at all the evidence that I presented that is physically here, that you can go up to and touch and feel and climb like you did at Machu Picchu. And then you got to ask yourself, well, how the hell did this happen? And, you know, the locals couldn't have done it. They didn't have the tools or the knowledge of how to do this. So some more advanced civilization had to have created it for a purpose. Now, I've given the purpose. The purpose was to collect gold, and I've figured out how it was done. And I'm saying that now's the time for people to accept the fact that we are the product of an advanced civilization. We all share their DNA. They were, in fact, the ones who jump-started our civilization by implanting their DNA, as explained in the cuneiform tablets, into this species Homo erectus. And Homo erectus becomes Homo sapien. And then Homo sapien becomes Homo sapien sapiens, the more intelligent. And if you trace all that through my books, I explain it very simply with pictures and supportive evidence. All the physical evidence you would need is in my books, and you have to make up your mind that that's really what happened.
All right, before we get out of here, I want to know one other question is, when did the Anunnaki disappear from history?
When they phased off the planet, right?
Yeah, and have they ever been back since?
Well, some people think they haven't all gone.
Oh, wow.
Still some here. I don't have any proof of that yet. Well, I'm getting close to it.
That's exciting.
On my lectures. But we think it was, maybe 600 years ago.
600?
600 A.D. Around 600 A.D.
Wow.
I think, the last evidence, because they had to be there for the building of the Colosseum, they had to be there for the building of the Pantheon and the Punta Guard. All these new structures that I'm pronouncing in my fourth book are within the last 2,000 years, and they had to be here to do that. So, but they they didn't go back. Excuse me, John, I got a frog in my throat.
That's okay.
So if you're going 600 AD, that's
they had the
1,400 years
mothership,
ago.
and they phased off on the mothership, and they're probably hanging around out by Mercury, and they can come back anytime they want. Not that they have to wait for their planet to come back through. They never could go back to their planet because they were told that they had lived on our environmental situation for so long that they would die if they went home to their home planet. So they're still on the mothership, and they can come back anytime they want. And I believe, and this is a positive thing for your audience, that they saved us in the flood. In other words, we would have been gonzo if they hadn't been around during the flood and after the flood to help us survive under 10 miles of mud. And if they saved us once, and if we get into deep trouble again, which we're approaching very rapidly right now,
Yes.
they may come back. My hope is they'd come back and save us from ourselves.
And obviously,
Amen to that.
they're not the only beings out there that have come back and forth from the Earth plane. Is that your opinion as well, Marshall?
You'd have to talk to my daughter about that. She believes in the star people and the Pleiadians and all that. The only evidence I have, guys, is the database of the Sumerian cuneiform tablets and the cylinder seals. And if I can find some hard physical evidence of these other species, it very well could be many other species that came here, but I have no physical hard evidence that I can photograph and write about. My daughter does. She's does past life regressions, and she has all this information, but she hasn't proven it to me yet. So I'm a tire kicker.
So you haven't figured it out from your past life, huh?
Yeah.
Well, we're pretty much out of time, and everybody, this is Marshall Klarfeld, and you need to go to adamthemissinglink.com, pick up these books. You can also go to Amazon, but these are fascinating. These are going to expand your mind.
There's a better deal on my webpage. The prices are better than Amazon.
Oh, well, then go
That's
to
where we want you.
adamthemissinglink.com. And it's been such a pleasure, and we want you to, say it on air that you'll be back as a guest again.
Please.
Well, I'd be happy to, Tony, anytime. I think this is information that needs to be disseminated. You guys are doing a great job in bringing out the truth, and the truth will set us free. But we need to have everybody telling each other what the real truth is, and I'm just one little cog in the wheel trying to do that. And I appreciate the exposure, and I'll be happy to come back.
Well, the other thing too, Marshall, is we can tell that this is a passion for you. It's a purpose for you, and that once you leave this earthly realm and you're up in non-physical looking down, you're going to be like patting yourself on your invisible shoulder going, I did good waking those humans up. So thank you for that.
Well, thank you. I think that, I've had a lot of things happen in my lifetime, but I've got the time now. I'm at the closer to the end than the beginning, so I want to use what time I have to help spread this information so people can understand. And hopefully, once we understand that we're all brothers under the skin, we all share the same DNA, we shouldn't be killing each other.
Amen.
That's
in the
right.
name of my God's the right God, et cetera, et cetera.
Thank you, sir.
Thank you.
We appreciate it. And
You're welcome.
go get the books. We love you guys. And we're going to take a quick break. And when we come back, we have Ross Hamilton. Don't go anywhere. Thank you, Marshall.
Thank you, Marshall.
You're welcome.
God bless.
All right, we're going to take a break. I'm on our Tony Sweet on UBN Radio. We don't want you to go anywhere. So
Don't touch that dial.
that's right.
Touch the dial.
Be right back.